That's very exciting. You and I are very alike in our journey and thinking. I'm very much relating to what you're saying.
Wow. I
Go through school, which is, has to be focused, and it narrows you, and you hone those skills. And then you do your life where you have to unpack all that stuff and kind of take away those boundaries so that you can see the broader picture and really what you can do, because this is like this, not your department.
Right. I mean, we're not a monolith, right? And I mean, I'm so fascinated by that, and so that brings me to interviewing you, because I mean, I just know that there's so much more to what you're doing, but also there has to be an inspiration behind how things began for you and whatnot. So I want to get into that, but first I want to introduce you, give you a proper introduction. You've helped me out quite a bit on this introduction. So, so I want to introduce Joan Maltese, PhD, is a co-founder and executive director of Child Development Institute, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to help all children reach their full potential by supporting relationships and environments that shape early development. Dr. Maltese is a clinical psychologist with more than 30 years experience working with high-risk infants, toddlers, and their families. And she's also on the faculty over at Cal State Northridge, which I have some friends that you probably may have known or met or taught. And Dr. Maltese provided consultation for First 5 LA and designing its new Best Start program and participate with First 5 LA's workforce development work group. And amongst that, she's done some amazing, incredible things. And I want to formally introduce the most amazing human being, Joan Maltese.
Not to mention that we have a shared love of tea.
Yes, absolutely.
Going back to our grandmothers. So that's actually where we met, at a farmer's market talking about tea. And I was like, whoa, I've never seen a tea vendor here at a farmer's market. It was so wonderful because of one of my passions. And it, really goes back to my very earliest years with my grandmother, who's from the UK, and would come to visit us. And every time she came, she brought teacups, and my mother would finally slow down, and we'd sit at the table and just have tea and chat. And it was like, my fond memories, but I really attached to that process of slowing down with a cuppa and really getting to know people when you sit down with a warm cup of tea. And probably to do with me becoming a psychologist, because I'm sort of, as a psychologist, I sit in my chair with my warm tea and it really helps me to focus and listen. So our tea background is really important, I think, in a way we connected.
I love that. I love that. And, it's funny, you're hitting all the notes that I tell people, because they're expecting kind of like the rules of like the prude, right? Well, how do you have your tea? And I let people know, listen, if you really want me to tell you, that's fine, I'll tell you. However, I respect everyone's grandmother who probably taught them about tea. Mine, being from Ohio and drinking Lipton, unfortunately, taught me that I needed to have tea when I was sick. And then my development led me into what I think of tea today. But yeah, so that's so incredible, and that's so awesome. That's funny, because I wanted to ask you first about England, the UK. So, born and raised there, or?
My grandmother was, not me. So my grandmother's from the UK and married somebody in the Canadian Air Force, and they moved over, to Michigan, as a matter of fact. And she never learned to drive, but my gosh, could she bake? She, she baked and tea and all of that stuff. So she was full of scones and pies and all of that. So every time she would visit, it was, baking and getting her all the right ingredients, which weren't the normal kinds of things. And anyway, was really a huge influence on my life. Sweet thing.
I love that. We had on Mrs. Patmore from Downton Abbey,
I
and
was
she
there.
baked. You were there. I
You
was
were,
so nervous. I was so nervous. She baked a chocolate cake. That was awesome, right?
yeah, no, that was really fun.
Incredible.
It was so cute.
Yeah, so like for me, it's funny because I generally try to stay behind the scenes a little bit, and and I'm not necessarily thinking about, the whole over, like the architecture of whatever I created or I'm involved in or whatever. I usually, I'm having fun. I have probably some interesting presence that people go, wait, why is he here? But I generally try to stay behind the scenes. So now that I'm getting pushed out front, I'm trying to find my voice and my sea legs. So you have to bear with me even on the interview. And so
You know what I
so
like about you, Lawrence, is that you keep it real.
thank
And
you.
that's like way better than the polished version of what everybody's expecting. And I don't know about you, but just in doing more Zoom things, I find people are just more real. Just because you like seeing them in their homes and they're just a little more relaxed and they're not expecting themselves to be so polished and, have some kind of speech or anything. So, even when you asked me to do this interview, I thought, oh my goodness, I love an opportunity to just chat with you and catch up. I didn't feel any pressure about it or anything. I don't even know what you were going to ask me, but just how exciting, how fun. I can't wait to talk with you.
I love that. And and it's funny because I thought this morning, I went, okay, Joan is super professional. Should I send her? No, don't do it. Should I ask her? No, don't do it. Just just treat it with the same respect, and and then let's have some fun and just like let's catch up. And for me, when I think about tea, I think about it's not so much of it like in a scientific sense or like all these crazy exotic ingredients. It literally is just the thing that allows people to have community. And for me, that is like the epitome of what it is that I'm doing. And when I started Charles and Company, literally the name when I first started was Perfect Company. And as ridiculous as that name sounds, um, it was more so the idea that that I wanted to somehow touch people in the most powerful way by helping them be able to come together with the most important people in their life, in their friends, in their family. How can I be central to that happening? And if I'm really going to set out on this journey, you
Mhm.
know, and so for me that was my mission.
Mhm.
And it was a great advisor of mine early on that just said, well, your mother gave you a great name. Name the company after yourself. And I went, who would do that? But here we are. So, so yeah. And speaking about those things, in going back to family, like I love to know more about, childhood for you, just growing up, where you grew up. Tell me about like just family for you in
Well,
that regard.
I actually wish I had a better story to tell about my growing up years, but I accept my growing up years as part of what helped me to be where I am. I had a very difficult childhood with an alcoholic and mentally ill father and a mother who was obedient and protected him. And we had 7 children in our family, and it was very harsh. However, in the middle of that, my role in the family came to me very early. And, it's one of those things. I'm 68 years old, so I kind of look back and I go like, how did I get here? And it's just this combination of what life gives you and what you choose to make of it. And so even at a very young age, I was like a little mother So my mother was busy taking care of my father, and I became the mother to my younger sisters and brother. So my sisters grew up just telling me they thought I was their mother. And I said, I was 9 years old when I was taking care of you. So I wasn't a very good mother. But I loved them and I took care of them. And that was really my early life, was always taking care of my sisters. And then my life really became taking care of my mother as well. My father was very violent. And so as being the caregiver in my family, obviously I needed to go into psychology. I didn't start out that way, though. I didn't, kind of come to some conclusion that said, this is really harsh and I got to figure it out. I'd never heard of psychology or therapy or any of that stuff growing up. I didn't know anything about it. My parents didn't graduate from high school. We didn't have a typical, we mostly had a life of shame and hiding. So on the other hand, I loved reading. And my escape from everything when I could was to curl up in a laundry basket and just read and read all night. So I wanted to go into literature. So when I was in high school, I found out about early graduation and going into college early. I was 16 years old. And so I started taking college classes and I had a full-time job. And in the process of taking college classes, and in fact, I was in the first class at Moore Park College. The first year that it opened, I don't know if you know Moore Park College, but it's a community college and it was like a brand new idea. And from my family, where people didn't go to college and even finish high school, this was a way out for me. So I went to Moore Park College and got a job on campus. And one of the first classes that I took was a psychology class. And in that class was a nurse who had a residential nursery. And back in the 60s and 70s, when babies were born with developmental disabilities, with Down syndrome, and in the 60s, we're having a lot more babies who were born addicted to drugs and had drug exposure, they were advised to put their children in a home because there was no hope for them. There was no idea that children, we could change their brains or help them develop. It was really put them aside, put them in a loving home. So this woman was a full-time nurse. She was going to school and she had 6 babies at her home in Simi Valley.
Wow.
So we had a field trip to her residential nursery. So I went to her home and I just fell in love with these kids. But I also felt like they were like put on a shelf, put away. So I asked to do an independent study there so I could understand what, kind of what this treatment was about. And I went there and basically she offered me a job immediately and said, could you come here after school and care for these kids? Because I have a full-time job. So these children were in the bedrooms. She slept on the couch. She was a nurse during the day, and her next door neighbor came in and watched them at night. That's the care they were getting. That was state mandated care. So I came in and I don't know anything. So the rules didn't count for me, right? So I'm like, can I take them home? Can I have little brothers and sisters who could play with them? So again, back in the 60s and 70s, early 70s, 69 and 70, it was like, sure. So I could take a couple of them in my VW Bug, no seatbelts, of course, but nevertheless, gas was like 10 cents a gallon, and drive them to my house in Camarillo, where my sisters would play with them, and they were just adorable. So here these kids were, basically at this home where they were left in cribs and really believed that there was no help for them. And I took them home and they were playing and interacting. And something inside of me was like, my heart just went out to them. So my work at the residential care facility was that I'm 17 years old, taking care of 6 babies, giving them medication at night through their bottles, taking them out of their cribs, trying to find, other places for them to be able to play instead of just being held in a crib. And so I decided I really wanted to spend my life finding out what their potential was. I just felt like there's more here. There's just more here. We should be doing more. And that is sort of the seed of what I wanted to do. But anyway, that's the start of the whole thing.
And wow, I had a set list of questions, but your story is so incredible, and this is the reason why I'm doing this. It's interesting how similar our stories are, and we're so diverse, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like the similarity is in the human story, right? And that's just incredible. So I think.
So let me just overlay on top of that. You can see why my grandmother's visits were so important. When my grandmother would come to visit us and my mother would slow down and we would have our tea, my father wouldn't dare to hit her or hit us. So he had to back off. And I don't know how he did it because he seemed out of control most of the time, but we had this little respite when my grandmother would come, and it was like pretending that we were all okay and having this little family, and it gave us some little hope. I always used to think we sort of scraped together little bits and pieces of how it could be. And so when we got out of there, it took me a long time to unpack all of that, obviously. Fortunately, I did get into a lot of therapy, but starting in that way, I think opened me up to the trauma that families have together and that they all live it together. And then sort of 7 kids, we all developed in very different ways to deal with that trauma. And mine was to take this spark that I found in working with young children and go on to university to major in now. So this is where I'm very like you, very, very like you, Lawrence. So, what should I major in if this is what I wanted to do? I really wanted to understand early development and work with babies from the beginning. And I really thought that understanding their brain was going to be critical to this. And then I thought, special education, psychology, all of that, and child development. However, those are 3 different disciplines which do not allow each other to talk to each other. So I started out taking some psychology classes, and then I wanted to incorporate special education. Special education said, pick one or the other. You can do special education, but you may not major in psychology. You could major in geography or history or anything else, but not psychology, because that doesn't make any sense. So I said, okay, I did their entire program all the way through my student teaching and special ed. And then I simultaneously did a major in psychology where I added all the infant development stuff I wanted to do. So my degree was like all over the place because it didn't fit into any of those categories. But I knew instinctively, these are the pieces that I need to have. So then I went to graduate school to get my PhD in neuropsychology. And they thought I was crazy because I was still talking about babies. They're like, no, we do brain science. I'm going like, yeah, babies have brains and they develop them. So again, I was sort of like off track with what their idea was, but pretty in sync with what I had a sense about. So fortunately, thank you, universe, for allowing me to have a little breakdown in the middle of my graduate work so that I could really open up and understand how affected I had been by my traumatic early life. So I got into therapy and just really started understanding the power of changing our perspective and our understanding and our sense of self. So I decided to become a clinical psychologist after all of that. So my graduate advisors were going like, you just did all this neuroscience and you're going to be a clinical psychologist. I go like, yep, bye. So of course, I went into clinical psychology, and who comes through my door? I did not advertise this at all. Most of my clients turned out to be families who had kids with special needs. So here I am, like, oh, it's all coming together here. And at the very same time, the world of neuroscience had this explosive new understanding about early development and understanding the brain, and the fact that there was so much plasticity in the brain, and that early experiences would build to create the capacities for how we understand ourselves and other people and how the world works. And that has everything to do with how you navigate your life. So all of that was coming together for me in my early years of being a psychologist. And I was listening every day to families telling me about their grief, their shame, their confusion, the fact that their very complex child was being sort of diced up into these categories, and they were getting treatment, but nothing for themselves, number one. And their child still, this harkens back to my beginning, were not treated like full human beings. They were treated like behavioral problems that the behaviors had to be eliminated. The parents had to be the executioners of children's behavior. It never touched on the emotional world of the parent and the child, and that should be developed and grown. So as I listened to families tell me about having 5 different kinds of therapies that they needed to take their child to, and in Los Angeles, that means driving every day all over, I thought about, what if we brought all of those disciplines together in one place and started talking to each other about our different takes, different lenses we were looking through, and could we start to create something that was a little more comprehensive for families, with the family at the center? The family experience, saying, you know what, you're the parent of this child. What you know is critical to our understanding how best to help your child. So rather than having the model that gets imposed on the kid, it was really about the family and what are the family's strengths, and how do we work with the family's understanding of themselves and child, and how do we help the family to evolve their own family dynamic to be a healing environment to whatever that potential might be. So, when I have my mission statement about helping children to reach their full developmental potential, that potential is whatever that potential might be. It doesn't have a cap on it. So, and it doesn't have an age on it. Is really understanding that our potential changes with the dynamic of our world. So that's how I started this CDI, this Child Development Institute. But I had the same experience, because when I went into this field, and this is in the late 80s and early 90s, I went to the funding sources who blatantly told me, you do not belong in this field. Children who have special needs we do not deal with social and emotional development. That's irrelevant. The only thing that matters is their behavior. This is determined as a gold standard in the 1950s, that we can do a behavioral analysis and then come up with a behavioral program that will shape that child into doing compliant behaviors that we need them to do. And that was like so not enough for me. It was like, I work with these kids. They're human beings. They're whole human beings. They have emotional lives. They're capable of loving and caring, and their wiring is misaligned, and they need to have a lot of help in getting that wired up in a way that helps them to make sense out of their world with their perceptions and sensory issues that are going on. So I just took a big old leap, and really the foundation of CDI was neuroscience and the science of attachment and social emotional development, and including families, and then bringing in speech and OT and PT and mental health and child development, none of whom had any of this training in their own graduate work, but came to CDI, and they were willing to kind of open up and learn a bigger picture of child development and family dynamic and how to support the family and see development happen in a very different way, with very different criteria for what we were looking for. And it wasn't the elimination of behavior, it was the development of the self. It was the development of a child who could recognize and regulate their emotional states, so they could be calm and ready to learn. They could relate. They could do back and forth exchanges. And that's really the foundation that we use at Child Development Institute. And, you know, now here I am 25 years later. And the people who used to tell me that I could never be in this field and that we could never use social emotional development, well, our regional center is now charged with showing results for social emotional development. I'm a speaker all over the state about this kind of development. So it took a while for the neuroscience and child development to come together, but it really is, state of the art in terms of what we do in our field now. So I was really happy that I got to be part of that charge early on, and that I had the opportunity, the privilege and the blessing to create a space where people would come together with an openness, not to be like the perfectionist, like this is what I learned and I'm the expert, but to let that go and say, and this is the truth, what people say, wow, I had no idea. I have what I have, but listening and learning from others expands our world of what we understand about a child's development. And right at the heart of that is understanding the wisdom that families bring to the team. So, that guides everything we do. Anyway, that's my story.
Wow, like you took away all of my questions. I'm nodding the whole time, and I go, I want to know, when does she unpack? When does she unpack? In the early part of your story, when you said that, just dealing with some of the trauma, all the traumas of just being a child and early, being a youth, I had to unpack myself, right? And I didn't know that. I just remember just being so angry, and I mean, it was like road rage. I would like, I can't believe they cut me off, and all these different things early on. And for me, it was a trauma of, I don't know, like a bad breakup or something that like allowed me to dive in,
Right.
and just walks up, and like, because I was by the foothills of Verdugo Mountains, I would just take walks and just hike all the way to the top in the early mornings, and I was able to unpack and think about, as a child, like almost like putting on those lenses and going, what was going on with grandma and grandpa? What was going on with mom and dad, and all those things. And and for me, there was this challenge of understanding about, like my grandmother, my grandfather was, alcoholic and, and whatnot. And my grandmother, she worked extremely hard, and as the two of them, for years of just hard work, they had a house and middle class blacks, and that house was taken by eminent domain. And I just remember growing up in a house with just unpacked boxes.
Mm.
And I was trying to understand the psychology of that. Why couldn't I bring friends over? Like, why was it so cluttered? Why? My grandmother did housework for some really wealthy, or in Ohio, of course, Jewish families, and so she had all of this, maybe one missing piece to some china or whatever it was. She had all this brand new everything packed up.
Mm.
Did she ever unpack that? And then I realized as an adult that I wasn't home.
Mm.
And here they are, depressed because of what, being powerless to a system. And so part of my journey is taking back that power to undo any system that would dare even lift a finger at me or someone I love.
Mm.
And And so that Aries in me says, I will undo anyone. In that manner, but it's also that journey of it's like this maverick's journey of I'm going to outlearn, I'm going to outdo, I'm going to outthink, and I'm just going to keep evolving. And but at any rate, my unpacking and just having that similar story connect between us. I mean, that is just so powerful. And thank you for sharing that, because that meant a lot to me. I wanted to ask about the early years. I it's like a mystery to me when there's these factoids about by the age of between I don't know, preschool and first 3 years, the child will and it all locks into place. We're both proof that we can develop and grow. So I'm confused as to.
It is confusing, yeah. So, in the first 1,000 days of life, in the first 3 years, the basic architecture of your brain is really getting laid down, because we're born with 100 billion cells, but they're not connected. It is experience that connects us. So depending on the experience that we have, those cells will wire up and start to make sense of the world. Is this a safe place? Where do I fit into this? Who am I? Who are you? How does this all work together? And so children are finding that out. So we are really learning from the very beginning of life, what is safe and what can we do and where do we fit into things? So that doesn't mean, however, that it isn't a changeable program. The problem is that if things don't change, you reinforce those things over and over and over. And that's what trauma tends to do. You start to anticipate the danger and you read danger even when there isn't danger. So children who've grown up in hostile environments, they see hostility, they're hypervigilant. And I was like, that kind of defensive reactive person. So because I expected things to go that way. And like you said, I was a fighter. I was like, nobody was going to tell me what I could or couldn't do. And I wasn't even overtly, taking people on. It's just like, it just didn't occur to me that I couldn't do. I didn't have those boundaries. The only way I survived in my family was to stay focused on what I needed to have and where I was going. So I had that kind of focus that helped me survive. But I certainly had the brain of a insecure, frightened, don't trust people. That is the template. And I have 6 brothers and sisters who are, very different, but quite successful, who we all have a basic architecture to begin with, which is not to trust. But that being said, you go through life and you have new experiences that can be transformative. And so some of my experiences, one experience I had when I was in the 5th grade, I went to Catholic school and I was terrified. I was so scared. I never spoke. I never spoke in class. I was a reader like crazy, but I hated to be any attention on me. It was just horrible. And so I just tried to stay, in the shadows and don't get caught and be a good student and all of that. But this nun sort of singled, and I thought she was terrifying because she was very sharp features, and she just frightened me. Anyway, she must have sensed that in me. She gradually took me in and she made me key monitor. I don't know. You're going to be in charge of opening the door after lunch, and you get to hold on to the keys. She made me something so special. And this is totally instinctual, and I can't even believe I did this. I attached to her during recess and lunchtime, I would just hold on to her waist. She didn't push me away. Not only that, she showed me what was in her pockets. She showed me what was underneath the little round thing. They had all these pens and things. She took me over to the convent. So when my grandmother would come to visit, my grandmother taught me to make tarts, and I would make tarts for her and pies. And so she became my first link to the outside world that felt really safe. And I continued a relationship with her. That was fifth grade. I continued a relationship with her through high school. So that was like very meaningful to me. And I know that sometimes when you are really frightened in the world, you will find something to hold on to that kind of can keep you going. And she was one of those. So I've never had, so that was my therapy, I want to say. And, and then I did get into therapy, as I said, when I was in graduate school, which really was wonderful because what happened is I fell apart. I had no idea why. Here I was like high achieving, doing everything I thought I knew how to do. And I was driving home just crying, just like not knowing why, but just crying and crying and crying until I had to go talk to somebody about it. And that was an okay start. And I got into much more serious therapy later on when I got into relationships. So I've been married for 40 years, my husband, Dan. And he and I were absolutely meant to be together because we could actually heal each other. It took time for me to really be able to trust and his patience and my patience. And we both were in therapy and really learned to build a new foundation of what we expect from ourselves and each other. So, that first template that we say gets laid down. Yes, but then you build on it, depending on what happens. And so I had another transformational experience. I'm going to say now it's 40 years ago. So I can honestly say I've had more years of safe, loving relationships than I had of the first. So I actually don't think about my early childhood very often, except to kind of appreciate what my whole family went through and appreciate what we all survived and managed to make the best out of that as we went forward. I have huge optimism and hope for people. And when I see people who are really sort of struggling and stuck in these old belief systems, I feel like anybody can get out of that. It just takes the right time and place and the willingness to do that. So as an adult, I would say, as much as I love CDI and all that I do there, my own personal life has been a spiritual journey of really finding what's important to me and who I am and why I'm here. And CDI is one of the reasons I'm here, because I can provide hope and light and a pathway for children that wasn't there before. And now I have a whole wonderful organization that's committed to shining the light to find that pathway. So my whole reason for being is just to be the light. That's all I have to do now, is just be the light. So my work is all around finding that, recognizing that, and remembering just to be the light. So that's my story.
Well, that answers more of my questions. This is going quite well. So early intervention, I connected that to the spectrum, autism spectrum, and coming in early, in a child's life, to be able to affect that, affect change. But what is it overall, early intervention, when it comes to a child?
Well, it really means recognizing that any challenge that a child is having early on, whether it's biological, like autism or Down syndrome, or a number of other neurological things that can be happening, or maybe it's something in the family, or maybe it's something in the environment. Maybe it's where you live and that there are not healthy food and not safe places to play. Whatever that threat is to a child being able to develop a sense of security and safety and belongingness, an early intervention is one that comes to recognize what those threats are, what those challenges are, and remove those barriers. And sometimes that means helping families to see how to interact with your child in a different way. Sometimes it means helping families to see that they need to take care of their own trauma and anxieties before they can soothe and comfort their child. So, and sometimes it means recognizing that they need to have more support from their community than they're able to get, because this is the whole thing. A child is a whole person. So when I came into the field, this is why it was ridiculous for me to be thinking about working with children with autism. They're just behavioral problems. No, They're actually whole people who have a whole life. It's not just their behaviors come from something, and it's complex. I'm not, that's true. That's why we needed to have all of those professionals involved. But a child who is challenged in whatever way by having adults around, because you know what, kids need grown-ups. Your brain is only going to develop based on what you have. You have to have a grown-up who's going to recognize where you're challenged, recognize what it is you need, whether it's safety or food or comforting or maybe even help with hypersensitivity or help with, we see kids who have a lot of fragility in their biological development, so they don't have the musculature even to be able to suck and swallow. I mean, it's so many little things, but it takes, adults who are willing to take the time and watch. Where is this child struggling and how do we support it? And from our perspective, it's helping parents to recognize and understand, what does this child need in terms of their development? And also putting that child's relationship with the parent at the top of the list about what that child needs. Because when you have a trusting relationship, then you can really utilize your parent to guide you through whatever it is that's very scary for you. So
very, very cool.
That's the intervention part. It really is bringing in support and recognizing the individual needs of wherever that child might be struggling.
Well, a lot of times we think a lot about, the child, of course, especially parents, you think about the child. But what about the parents? Like, I'm curious, and I just kind of went walking through like Mayo Clinic and whatnot, and just trying to understand this thing that I've always heard about was postpartum depression, and how mothers dealt with that, but also in researching a little bit more about your background as well, I stumbled across someone acknowledging that African American babies, deal with some issues, and the parent, has to kind of cope with those things too. So, and the male side of it is what I wanted to kind of all string together. So it's the mom, and then also the dad that has to deal with this. And I was just curious because I saw that there was like 3 levels of it. That there's the simple level of baby blues syndrome, and then it just kind of expanded into postpartum and then psychosis. But like, can you expand on that for me?
Well, it's so complex because when you when a couple has a baby, a lot of things get triggered. First of all, there's a lot of hormones that are circulating, so that makes a mother more vulnerable to having emotional shifts, and then you have a lack of sleep. Now this is affecting the whole family, so there's another dynamic in there. Then you have the adaptability of the baby, so you might have a baby that's really easy to soothe, and you may have a baby that's really difficult to soothe. And it's not a formula. It's just that there are a lot of variables that are in play, and then there's a genetic sort of predisposition maybe to be more anxious or have more of a depressive reaction to this kind of, you might say it could be a traumatic experience. And then, was it an easy birth? Did the baby struggle at birth? Was it an easy pregnancy? There are lots and lots of things that go into it. And there's not a simple prediction. There's simply an awareness that we need to have and be sensitive to families. And so when that baby comes, first of all, just recognizing that there might be a lot of emotional ups and downs in what you expect and what you get, and how does that impact the couple? And as you were suggesting, a lot of times dads kind of get left out of the equation, and that doesn't mean that they are not also being triggered in whatever their trauma might be around their capacity to care for their family, the capacity to manage their own emotional ups and downs and expectations, the lack of sleep, throwing that in all the time. So, all of these things come together. So it really is a family dynamic. And postpartum depression doesn't just affect the mother, it affects the whole family. And this is the same thing with babies who have any kind of early trauma, whether it's biological or circumstantial, it impacts the whole family. So when one person is dysregulated and really feeling overwhelmed by what's going on, it just, everybody's going to be impacted by that. So it's really important to hold the whole family and to help that family find individually, they each need to be addressed in terms of what's going on and why, where does this come from? And as you say, unpack, which is a nice word for it, just kind of like take it apart a little bit to see where that support is needed. And then to find the support that they may need to have to see more clearly, the realistic expectations about what they can be doing and what should be happening, what a baby should be doing. So really understanding, more realistically that babies do cry, you can't always soothe them, making sure that you've got help so that's not all on your shoulders. And, if we really look at the evolution of families, this is not a two-person deal. It should be a 4 or 6 adults to every baby. So, when you have a highly functional family in a community, you've got grandparents who are close by, maybe an aunt and an uncle, maybe 2 sets of grandparents is really great because everybody needs a break. So, being able to get away, start to nurture yourself, to deal with any trauma triggers that may be coming up is really important. But so many people don't have any space. So they're under fire and under duress, and it just makes that coping that much more difficult. So it's really important that we we recognize and support families as early as possible. One of the things that we did a couple of years ago is we opened a clinic on the campus of Providence Tarzana Medical Center. And so, and that was because when babies are born prematurely or they have special medical needs, is very traumatic for the family. And we want to make sure that those families are touched and held as soon as possible. And the truth is, the families who need the most often are the ones that we miss, right? Because if there's not somebody there to say, hey, we're here for you, they go, here's a list of referrals if you need it, and out you go, and good luck. And first of all, I don't know how to navigate that system. I don't want to talk to somebody else about it. I might feel just ashamed about this. I just might feel I don't trust it, all of that. And so, we drop the ball and we drop them. And then we see them years later when they are struggling and their child is struggling. And then we find out, oh my goodness, we could have helped you from day one. And what a different life that would have been for you. So that really motivated us to want to have this program where we are there for families while they're in the neonatal intensive care unit, and they get to know us, and we have free programs for them. We do home visits for them. And, we want to make sure that even if they say, no, I don't need anything, we go like, you know what, that's okay, because we're here when you do. And they usually do.
I love that. I love that. I see my nieces, they're the brightest spirits, and hearing about my mother telling me, yeah, your sister took them to Kangaroo Land or something, and they're jumping, or to the swim pad, and yeah, your sister's up there just swimming with them, and I'm like, man, that's so awesome. The interesting thing to me was when they were born, there was this personality that I'm like, but they're babies,
right?
And so my oldest nieces are twins, and they had their own separate personalities. I couldn't understand, how is that even possible? How early do you start seeing these things from your end of just these incredible lives?
Birth, absolutely, birth. I know I have a number of twins in my family too, so it's really fun to see. But no, from day one, they have different energies and different personalities, as you say. They're, some of them are sort of like up and at them, and others are, going to
So
be shy,
hilarious.
and I don't like that. And yeah, they're absolutely, every child, even identical twins, are different biological beings with different neurologies, and then they start to interact with the world based on that. So, their personalities start to develop, and yeah, no two alike. And babies, they're, each one of them comes with their own unique template of who they're going to be, and then they interact with that environment. So,
That's awesome.
yeah,
Well, I was just going to say, so one of the fun things that I really enjoyed with us is are the CBS block parties.
oh yeah,
Those are so fun on New York Street, and I've met so many incredible people. In fact, the CEO of Providence St. Joseph, he's really really awesome. And then just being in that environment, being on a studio lot, that was just so much fun. And how you go about your business, and I mean, you're so professional. And I'm thinking to myself, even in the most professional environment myself, I'm just a big kid, and I'm just like, just kind of just laughing about and loose. And but you're like, it's, I mean, you even the way that you run CDI is, I kind of think of it as like a Fortune 500 company, where like there's almost like the board and the reporting and just how cool it is just to see you in operation, and like how much of a dynamo you are. Um, so to have this opportunity to be able to get a chance to speak with you, it's not offline, of course, it's online, but
mhm,
but just more of just a natural conversation is just so awesome.
yeah.
But yeah, so I want to know more about CBS and how in the world, just such class to be able to, like every year, like there's an amazing gala at CBS Studios. I'd love to know more about like some of your greatest stories around, some of those times.
No, I think that this is my take for my life, is every opportunity I have comes from a relationship. So the very first year that I started CDI, I sent out a letter to not very many people, but as many people as my husband and I could think of, to tell them of my idea. I was going to do this, and wondered if they, how they might want to be involved. And, it's your standard sort of first cold call donation solicitation. Well, I'm trying to think of his name. Michael Klausman, who was the president of CBS Studios, actually knew my husband Dan, because Dan had done some favors for him, and which involved getting him a fishing trip. Anyway, that's another story. But because of that relationship, Mike Klausman called me and said, you know what? I really care about kids too, and I'd like to have a conversation with you. So I went to CBS Studios and went up to Michael Klausman's office, and he said, I think this is a great idea. I really love what you're doing, and it really matters to me because I have a large family, and I think family is really important. Da, 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 da. How can I help? And one thing I can do for you is I can offer you our studio to have your events, and I'll make donations to whatever, we can do as a studio to support you. So that was about a relationship. There's no like studio. It's Mike Klausman. He was a person who valued what he got from my husband and values children. So that was the best first contribution I ever got. So even without having like much of a staff, and a very, we were very tiny then when we started. We could have our first little fundraiser at CBS. And to tell you the truth, so there was our board flipping hamburgers. I mean, we did it all ourselves. So just, you know how we are. We're all doing everything. And it was so much fun. And so after that, because this was a long time ago, 1995, I think, or even earlier, that we did that. And then, CBS actually started doing all kinds of fundraisers after that. And they became a kind of a destination. They didn't used to be, but they kept that special relationships with us. And then we got contributions from, people who Dan worked with on the studio and of course, Dan brings the magic, because that's what he does. So he designed it to whatever, the theme was that we were going to have, whether it was New York subway cars, which were from the Seinfeld set. And there was another year where we had the Seinfeld living room where people could sit on his couch and take their picture there. So yeah, we had a lot of fun with that, and just coming up with things. That was cool.
I love it. I know there was one moment where you presented me with all of these recognitions, and I'm just showing up. I have no idea. I'm just trying to do my part in life, and without a ton to give, but just if I can just show up. And that moment, I'm getting emotional a little bit, but that meant a lot.
Yeah, because our relationship was that you were there for us, and that meant a lot to us. And we didn't forget. It wasn't just, sort of an afterthought. I wonder if Lawrence is going to be here. It was like, well, we got to have Lawrence. So you became part of the fabric of our family, of supporting our community and families. And it was very important to us to recognize your contribution and your consistency and support in being there. And I mean, it's the same thing about when you emailed me and said, do I want to be on this show? It's like, yes. Are you kidding? I'm excited about what you're doing. And, and I follow you on Instagram, and it's because we have a relationship. And, there's that goodness that you do. And we just resonate. And now that you tell me a little bit more about your history and I tell you a little bit more, boy, I can see why we connected so well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I, as I bring this to a close, there's some things that I like to just know a little bit more about. What's your outset and how you're looking at, not only what's next, but what can you impact, or what impact you like to leave. I want to know about what legacy means for you, and where does that land in your life?
That's a very important question, and clearly something at my age I'm kind of at the forefront. And that is that I am so grateful for having this opportunity to bring people together, to continue to develop and evolve. And for me, the legacy of CDI is that it's never stagnant. It's built on a philosophy of strengthening families, of building upon strengths of people, of bringing people together who can provide something larger than any one of us could do by ourselves. So I'm really about this community and neighborhood network process. And for me, the legacy is that it continues without me being directly in charge of it. And so as I plan for that succession, I've really always worked with our staff so that we have a number of leaders. And it doesn't depend on me. There's lots of people have leadership roles and vision and input and impact. And I'm not the only one. I get to be a spokesperson a lot, but heck, I don't do all this stuff. These amazing clinicians and our administrative support and our administrative leaders, we all work together. And I like to see this moving on beyond me, and I'm very excited about that. I do have a couple of things that I want to bring as new pieces of myself. And one of those is I had a dream a couple of years ago, try to make this quick. And I had a dream that I was dancing with a bunch of older women at the Early Learning Center, our new learning center. And I said, "Welcome to the Crone Cafe." Now, I don't know if you know what a crone is, but it's a wise woman and it's an elder woman. And in our society, I believe that we push our elders to the side. Okay, you're old, you're retired, go knit. And I think our elders hold wisdom. And they don't need to drive the bus necessarily. They don't have to be at the front of the pack. But I think that there's a lot of information that we have. And so I had this dream about a crone cafe and about reaching out to grandmothers to say, this is a call to arms, grandmother arms, the arms that hold, not the arms that hurt. And that if grandmothers could come together and just be the light and represent love and healing, then we could impart this wisdom about, how we hold our younger generation. Because I think there's so much stress on everybody that there need to be grandmothers who are just here going like, it's okay. Just reminding us about loving and caring and making space for everybody. So that's my vision. I had it in a dream and I think I'll carry it through somewhere. So someplace I want to create the Crone Cafe. Maybe I'll do that for CDI. I don't know, but that's my deal.
I love it.
We'll have tea and we'll dance and we'll,
I love it. I love it. And man, it's just such an honor to have this opportunity and to speak with you. For me, this is a lot of catching up and friends mean a lot to me. People that impact my life and I appreciate you. And so I take a piece of you with me and hoping to spread your legacy because it's my story of you and my story of, hey, I out of nowhere, I just received all this recognition and I carry your name with me. Right. So, and I think for a lot of people that in the world where we're taking, they don't realize that a part of their legacy is in giving and is not in your weakness. That's in your legacy. Right. And so I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you too. I'm very, very grateful that you came into my life, and it's been my pleasure to expand our conversation.
Absolutely.